All right, everyone, I would like to welcome you to today's Economic Matters Committee hearing. It is Tuesday, July 27th, 2021 at 6:33 p.m. First, I will begin with the roll call. Here at the meeting is Alderman Savage and Alderwoman Finlayson and myself. Next item up, can I get a approval of the agenda or any amendments to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the agenda as written.
I'll second that motion.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Next up, the approval of our minutes from the 6:22 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move approval of the minutes for the June 22nd meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved. Up next, appointments and reappointments to the committee. AP 821, the appointment of Amy Burdick to the Recreation Advisory Board. Takia, you said that she is not present today, correct?
That is correct, and she has not replied to Hillary.
Okay. Colleagues, we've taken a look at her resume for past two meetings, but I personally, she's a new appointment, correct? Not a reappointment?
Correct.
I personally feel a little uncomfortable with a new appointment and not getting a chance to speak to them one-on-one. Do you all feel differently?
Mr. Chair, I concur. I'd ask Ms. Green, is there a particular reason why she has not participated for now 3 meetings?
I'm not sure. I talked to Hillary earlier, and she said that she had reached out to her, and she has not replied.
Okay, well, I have a difficult time moving this forward. And this is the 3rd opportunity she's had to come before us, and she has not replied. So I say we postpone it.
I am in agreement. So we have a motion to postpone. Do I have a second, Alderman Savage?
Yes, I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, up next.
Mr. Chair, could we also maybe ask Hillary, I guess, how she wants to proceed? Because I think we do have to make sure the person's still interested. If they haven't responded, I'm wondering if something has changed and what Hillary may want to do to proceed.
And if it's a scheduling thing, like, we can try to figure out a plan around that. I understand scheduling issues.
Yeah.
And maybe she could join us virtually.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, well, she would be able to Skype. That's fine, but we just haven't had any reply from her.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. All right, up next, AP 1121, the appointment of Leslie Xavier to the Historic Preservation Commission. I understand Ms. Xavier is here. Would you like to step on up to our table?
Thank you very much.
So, Ms. Xavier, welcome. We have had the opportunity to go through your... be sure to turn on your microphone, by the way. Push the button.
Yeah. Either one.
Either one.
There we go.
Excellent. So we've had the opportunity to go over your portfolio, your resume, your application letter. Something I always like to ask in these live testimonies is what made you want to come and take this position?
I have been involved with Historic Annapolis, with volunteering my time for Annapolis, in any number of the historic homes. I developed the architect's tour along with Craig Martin. So the city has just been a loving part of me and my husband's. We moved here in 2001 and moved into Phoebe Jacobson's old house. And the love affair started there. I don't know if you know who Phoebe Jacobson is.
I am not familiar with this.
She was one of the archivists for the state of Maryland, and she was the person that found the what is it called? She helped Alex Haley find the trace that he was looking for. And so we have traveled around, and so now I'm back here and working over at the Naval Academy with Public Works. And I've known Tim Leahy for a long time and worked with him on St. Mary's Church and the Carroll House. So this just seemed to be a natural fit when he talked to me about it.
All right. Do any of my colleagues have questions for Ms. Xavier? Alderman Savage?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you. Your background looks obviously very well suited, since professionally, but also your other experience with historic. You said it was with historic. I'm trying to find my notes here. Historic Annapolis, Foundation. And so sounds like you've done architectural work, and I see you have a portfolio posted of a number of Annapolis projects.
Yes, so I worked on Park Place, doing the design of one of the bay areas in the lobby, and then worked with Bignell, Watkins, and Hasser for a number of years, Pool and Pool Architecture, which was over in Eastport at the time. So my knowledge as far as architecture in Annapolis kind of spans through commercial, residential, historic properties, schools, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Right, and do you still do the professional work?
No.
Okay.
After we started traveling and went to Naples, Italy, and then we lived in Japan, it was kind of hard to go back into that. It was much easier to drop into a federal government position.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And so what do you see as some of the challenges that are going to be faced by the commission in the future?
I think that definitely the flooding situation in downtown Annapolis here is a huge issue. I think that housing and, of course, taking and dealing with other complicated issues revolving around historic buildings and both the climate change and flooding and overbuilding in the area. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure there's many, many more.
Those are certainly some of the big ones. So. Well, good. Well, thank you. That's really all the questions I have. Thank you for your interest, and this sounds like it'd be a great fit.
Thank you very much.
Alderman Finlayson?
Yes, Miss Xavier, I just want to say thank you. I don't think anyone has ever provided us with the level of examples of your work as you have.
I wanted the job.
Phenomenal.
Oh, thank you
So
very much.
I just want to say thank you, and I think the Historic Preservation would truly value your skill set. So thank you for being willing to volunteer.
Thank you.
Very
I'm
impressive.
honored. Actually, I'm very honored.
Very impressive. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I will recommend that we give a favorable recommendation for Leslie Xavier to the Historic Preservation Commission.
A second.
All right. It has been put forward and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations.
Thank you very, very much.
Ms. Xavier, your name will go before the full council in September now, since we won't have another meeting until then.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. All right, everyone. So up next, we are going before legislation before the committee. We've had several people who have contacted me wishing to testify. Testimony is up to the discretion of the chair, and I will allow it. For those of you wanting to testify, either by Skype or live in person, I will be doing a 3-minute rule as a traditional city council meeting. I will be, I don't want to use the word harsh, but disciplined on that 3-minute timer, which will be kept by Takia, which is much better than my phone. So up first, we have via Skype, Mr. Greg Cantori.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Hello, Mr. Cantori. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
If we can turn it up, as is our common, let's pause it.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me okay?
Excellent, yes. Now please say your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Greg Cantori, 105 Eastern Avenue in Eastport.
Mr. Chair, may I ask why we can't see him? Is there a problem?
He doesn't have a video camera. All right, Mr. Cantori, the clock has been, can we reset the clock, please? All right, Mr. Cantori, we have reset the clock. Your 3 minutes begins now.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to speak to the issue of accessory dwelling units and the fact that the need has been great and is only going to be getting greater. As we know, we're in the middle of a housing crisis, and a couple stories locally. In fact, I just met with a couple. They're young. They're in their early 30s, and she has just become pregnant, and they were on their sailboat. They actually were living on their sailboat, and they needed to find an affordable place so that she could safely have the baby and rent. And they could not find anything, but they did find a ADU located off of Forest Avenue or Forest Drive, and that's where they're renting right now. It's not a legal unit. It could be legal, but it's not. And they were able to find that for a very affordable rent. It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and they enjoy it immensely. It has a nice backyard, and the host family has been wonderful to them. So I just wanted to tell you that quick story there. There's also actually something that just came across my feed here is that Dana Stein, our senator's Dana Stein, is actually helping an individual who has 2 large dogs. She's a PhD candidate at UMBC, and she's living in the Annapolis area, trying to live in the Annapolis area, and she can't find anything that's affordable that would allow 2 dogs. Accessory dwelling unit landlords tend to be very flexible in what they can do with those units, and that's another exciting opportunity for that. Lastly, just the fact that ADUs, this is the economic side of things, are extraordinarily efficient. They cost less to build and maintain and so on than any other kind of housing opportunity out there. They're extraordinary in terms of their energy use. Their resource use is much lower than just about any other housing type out there. They use less materials and so on. But also importantly, they allow people to live near where they work or go to school or to other opportunities. And that's critical because we talk about the traffic and the Bay Bridge and other things like that. ADUs allow someone to be able to be closer and maybe even walk to work. And that's another quick example being a teacher who's now currently living in an ADU actually in Annapolis, another illegal unit. She lives in the basement. The woman above her was going to lose her house if she hadn't, because she's divorced, if she hadn't rented out that ADU. And her brother came in, converted it to an ADU. She rents it out, and the teacher lives downstairs. And the teacher has been able to walk to work now. So the teacher now lives in a walkable neighborhood. They both became best friends during the COVID, and they mutually support each other. 2 single women mutually supporting each other in a home locally. And I just wanted to give you those quick examples of why ADUs make a lot of sense for us. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Cantori, for your testimony. Do we have any others on Skype? We do not. Okay, so moving on to our live testimony. No need to have signed up. I did not put out a list, so please one at a time come forward. Come to the mic. If you are here to testify on 0921. Right there. Just make sure you turn on the microphone.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having this session. I've never been to one of these sessions, so
You're welcome. If you could please if you could please state your name and address into the microphone, and then
Yeah.
we will start the testimony.
Yes. My name is Nisha Herrera. I live in 909 Wells Avenue, Annapolis, in Ward 8. My husband and I, Mario, moved to Annapolis from Montgomery County back in 2000 2007. Our daughter was a midshipman at the Naval Academy at that point, and we just fell in love with the charm and the beauty of Annapolis. And we bought this small house on Jefferson Street, which we currently rent out as a long-term rental. And we loved it so much, and we love Ward 8 so much, that we literally moved 9 houses down. We built a house on a property, and we've been living there since 2011. In 2015, we finished our basement, and it's a 1-bedroom, 800-something square feet apartment, has a private entry on the side, and we share a door in between us. And of course, we complied with all the city regulations and only put it in like microwave and a little, infrared stovetop. So nothing plugged in or no stove, nothing like that, even a small refrigerator. And we've been very fortunate that we've been able to house brand new officers when they get commissioned, and they'll have these strange short, long-term stay requirements before they go off to their next training as Marine or Navy officers. So we've housed them anywhere from 1 month to 5 months at a time for the past 5-6 years. We also had, during COVID, we had a brand new math professor from Naval Academy who was moving from West Point to Naval Academy. Good move for her sake. And she could not find a house to purchase right away, so she lived in our house, in our apartment, for about 8 weeks before she found a house in Severna Park. And we also use the short-term rental platforms and rented about 100 nights a year, mainly between April and November, when football season ends. Pretty much rental ends. And I would say 85% of our guests are Naval Academy families, and then alumni and some St. John, college as well. And we've had the best of experience. As a matter of fact, this past May, during commissioning 21, since we could not plan a vacation, we actually stayed in the apartment while a swimmer family stayed in our main house. And we realized how lovely it is, and no wonder we can rent it like this whenever it's available. But it doesn't have a stove, so I pretty much told my husband we can't live there.
That is the time, and
Okay.
thank you so much for your testimony.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope that you consider voting for that amendment with all these provisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Welcome. If you could
Good
please say
evening,
your
everyone.
name and address into the microphone.
Sure. I'm Katie George. My address is 695 Americana Drive here in Eastport. Ready? Those of you who know me already know that I'm a very strong advocate for more affordable housing alternatives here in Annapolis, and ADUs are one of those alternatives. But why am I an advocate? Well, partly because I spent 9 months as feasibility chair of the city's Housing Affordability Task Force, looking at ways to increase housing options for Annapolis residents. But I've also, and probably more importantly, I've owned an ADU and experienced firsthand how financially beneficial it was for me. I was able to actually buy a home because I had a little house at the back of my lot. For 5 years, I rented this unit, and that rental income helped defray my mortgage. Then for the next 5 years, our little house allowed my elderly mother to live on site with me and her grandchildren, rent-free. So yes, I personally know the financial advantages of having an ADU when you have limited financial resources. But let's also consider the financial advantages ADUs can provide for our city and for all its citizens. I reviewed the policies and practices of Alexandria and Charlottesville, Virginia, as well as Montgomery County, Maryland, and learned the following. Data supports that less than 2 out of every 100 homes actually choose to have an ADU, so the annual additional inspection cost burden to the city is minimal. ADUs are needed to support the ever-evolving housing needs of our population. For example, In Annapolis, a typical one-bedroom apartment in a multifamily community leases for anywhere from $1,300 to $1,800 per month. That's for a one-bedroom. To qualify to lease such a unit requires documented annual income of from $47,000 to $65,000, and that's well beyond the reach of many of our workforce employees. ADUs can fill that gap. Owners of ADUs support our city's financial base by paying annual fees, paying higher property tax for their improved property, and by having increased income, which then flows back to the city through our state income tax. In short, ADUs are a smart economic choice for Annapolis because ADUs provide needed housing to address the rental stock shortages in Annapolis. They allow existing homeowners to optimize the highest and best use of their own property. They increase the property value and resale of the primary residence for the property owner. They serve as a cost-effective private guest accommodation for visiting family and friends. They support homeownership by allowing long-term rental income stream to help defray mortgage costs. And they generate additional income for the city with limited associated costs. So I propose we reject the fear-mongering and negativity surrounding increased density and vote favorably for 0921. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. George. Who's next?
Hi, good evening. My name is Ted Shiels at 430 4th Street in Eastport. I just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the need. And this is some information according to the Housing Affordability Task Force report. That report clearly demonstrates that we have a severe housing shortage. Each year we build just over half of the residential units we need to keep up with demand, operating at a deficit that gets worse each year. If all available land were used to build single-family housing, we'd run out of land in 18 years, creating a highly competitive market and lead to ever-increasing land values. The cost of living in Annapolis has increased considerably for decades and outpaced income of city residents. Annapolis is 29.6%. The cost of living in Annapolis is 29.6% higher than the national average of cities, and more expensive than Washington, D.C., Boston, and slightly less than Seattle and New York City. So clearly, we have a problem. We have a shortage of homes, and we're running out of places to build. A solution that is simple in concept is simply build more residential units on less land. ADUs are the low-hanging fruit that we can enact almost immediately. They're inherently efficient and encourage modest living. They blend in with the existing fabric of the neighborhood and will not stand out or change the character of residential areas. ADUs can be built faster and less expensively than all other housing types and require the least total investment to build. And ADUs will be the most affordable housing type available and will provide owners a much-needed option to supplement income. According to the 2009 comp plan, it recommends that ADUs be utilized as they can provide added income to the homeowner and provide a small, affordable housing unit. The 2040 draft comprehensive plan goes a step further in support of ADUs and states that one of the goals is to increase the supply and diversity of housing types and locations where such housing can be compatibly provided to best facilitate housing that addresses the particular needs of the city's households. True actions they recommend to reach those goals are to amend the zoning ordinance to provide one ADU by right on all single-family lots in all zoning districts. And another action is to create legislation that incentivizes ADUs. So we were told 12 years ago in 2009 that ADUs provided a benefit. We know that they will provide a useful tool moving forward. That's 12 years we failed to act and continued to fall farther and farther behind, all the while adding to our housing deficit. We can start to change that with this bill. ADUs are widely accepted by planning departments and other planning professionals across the country as providing real and measurable benefits. After many, many test cases in city after city, the results are in. ADUs have been repeatedly proven to provide economic, social, and environmental benefits to cities while improving the quality of life of residents.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. All right, who would like to testify next in 0921?
Hello, my name is Susan Margulies, and I live at 113 Conduit Street. And I just wanted to say a couple of words. The first is I wanted to tell a story of someone in Alderwoman Finlayson's ward, actually. She bought a lovely condominium, and she used to be able to Airbnb the first floor, but then it turned into a kerfuffle with her housing association. It's not that they banned Airbnb. It's just that they didn't want to change their code or whatever to allow Airbnb. And so now she's looking for a new place. And what kind of place is she looking for? One with an ADU. Because she knows that as a single woman teacher, living in a place with an ADU is exactly how she's going to be able to make ends meet. And I really want to speak to that because when I moved here in 2013, I wanted to bike to the Naval Academy for the next 30 years. I wanted to be able to bike in a snowstorm. I wanted to be able to bike in the rain. I wanted to be able to bike at 9 p.m. at night so that I could serve my students. And that meant I had to live close. And I wanted a duplex. I looked really hard for a duplex. I looked for 2 years and I couldn't find one. And so I ended up buying what I call my falling down house. And I asked my architect when we realized that there were pipes that weren't capped and there were wires that were bound with cloth and the chimney had collapsed. I asked him, since such a serious renovation is required, can't I subdivide? Can't I subdivide and turn my little house into a duplex? And he said, no, it's not possible. And so I'm asking you to make this legislation as flexible as you possibly can, because there's one window when people renovate their homes, and I've missed my window. I will never subdivide my home now because now my pipes are capped and my electricity is good and my chimney is just fine. Unless I win the lottery, I'm not going to do it. It was too much. I ended up sleeping in a tent for like a year and a half. There's one window for renovating a property. And Alderman Savage, your amendment, it's just, you can build a tennis court, you can build a gazebo, you can put in a swimming pool, you could build a 6-car garage, and no stormwater management would be required. But building an ADU, and now you have this extra cost, which I think could be up to thousands of dollars, not just a rain barrel, as I understand it, is stormwater management. And I would applaud you if you wanted to be consistent and treat swimming pools and garages and tennis courts all the same, but to single out ADUs in that way, the one type of housing that we all really need, I wish you would rethink your amendment and make it as flexible as possible. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Margolis. Do we have any other testimony on 0921? Welcome.
Thank you, Alderman Shandelmeyer. And my name is William Small, 702 Melrose Street, Alderwoman Finlayson, Alderman Savage. Thank you. I support the bill as a small incremental step towards really what should be getting Annapolis away from its racist, classist roots, which single-family zoning is built on, built to serve. And I, for example, grew up visiting my grandmother's house in Wardour, Claude Street, where they have ADU in the back over top of the garage. We're talking 1980s. Like, this place was built in the 40s or 50s probably. And they would rent it out, and she rented out rooms in her house, all openly illegal. Like, I grew up understanding that my grandparents were participating in a conspiracy along with their, I mean, I didn't understand the words, but looking back, they were conspiring along with their tenants to defy the law, neighbors all on board. So this is only a small glimpse of the world that we all live in, where there's people all over the city in wealthy neighborhoods flagrantly renting out rooms, renting out their ADUs with no, with the law does not comport with the behavior of the public right now. But it's the wealthy, commonly white, but it's not really a racist thing anymore. It's more like a classist thing. The upper class doesn't have to uphold the law, and there's plenty of tenants that are more than happy, that are glad that they rather live there than in subsidized housing, and they're probably paying less than your HACA tenants and happier. And it's not segregated like Annapolis's public housing projects are commonly black. It's like whatever color you are, if you get this housing and you're happy there and you maintain the agreement with the landlord, you get to stay there. It's probably better, and you don't hear, there's not scandals in the paper about the mold and the city being sued, the landlord, the owner being sued. It's all, it's more on the up and up, in my opinion, than the way the city's running its housing. And there's people like me who would be glad to invest in more of this private market housing, taking down my garage, building up a better structure with more housing for the city at my expense. That I don't think this bill would enable me to build another structure on my property with the more housing, but I want to. So I don't think this bill goes far enough. And if you look at my property versus the neighbors, well, there's duplexes all up and down my street. Those are basically ways to circumvent single-family zoning in my community. My property's bigger, but this bill would not allow me. But I appreciate the effort, and I look forward to the city working to overcome single-family zoning as a discriminatory practice.
Thank you, Mr. Small. All right. Any further testimony on 0921? Welcome. If you could please state your name and address into the microphone.
Will do, and thank you very much. My name is Quinton Cummings. I live at 5 Enclave Court in Annapolis, Maryland, 21403. Thank you very much for having me here, and I speak in favor of the passage of the ADU bill. Who supports ADUs, right? Is it a conservative or a liberal issue, maybe a young versus an old issue, or maybe it's an environmental issue? Maybe it's none of that, and it's really just an issue of exclusionary neighborhoods versus everyone else on the issue. In the last decade, we see organizations, think tanks, and communities across the entire United States in favor of infill development in a responsible manner. In the last few years especially, ADUs have shown to be a fantastic way of facilitating this infill development in that reasonable manner. One way that addresses both environmental issues of urban sprawl, as well as confronts the racist legacy of single-family exclusionary zoning. Just to give you a rundown of some of those organizations you may have heard of, maybe Forbes magazine leans a little bit to the right? They are heavily in favor of ADUs. How about AARP? AARP, most people consider them maybe centrist, but either way, they advocate for those of generally over 55 years old. They're also in favor of ADUs. How about the Sierra Club or the Environmental Magazine or a list of other environmental ones? Those also in favor of ADUs. I have all these right here to submit, as well as books. I've got lots of history, lots of my own profession behind the planning profession and the environmental profession. I submit to you lots of evidence, data that shows that ADUs are good for the environment, good for bringing down the cost of living. Right here, environmental issues. ADUs are fully supported by a wide range of environmental groups, including the Sierra Club and the Environmental Magazine. Simply their words, quote, "Climate activists all over the country have been advocating for ways to limit the environmental crisis. One of those ways is to implement more ADUs. These homes provide a less detrimental environmental impact and affordable housing. They can cut CO2 emissions by almost 40% over a lifetime compared to a traditional family home. They also provide much needed housing without creating the need to develop and build on new lots." They point out in these articles that we're moving in the wrong direction, that while families are getting smaller, homes are getting bigger. that in the last 40, 50 years, we keep building these mega mansions while our families are decreasing. The average size of development of a house is increasing on a per person ratio. So a common critique, moving those aside, is that, but we have to change the zoning to allow this. Yes, we do, and we should. Are you familiar with the racist history of single-family zoning anyway? The kind of zoning that prohibits this kind of environmentally beneficial development. In 1985, the Journal of American Planning published a scathing article on the history of urban planning in the United States, while the profession of urban planning has evolved since then to include issues of equity and fight the foundations created by urban profession during the times of redlining and... Okay, let me just
finish your thought, Mr.
Okay, just real quick to finish the thought that in the times that we've, since the planning profession started following World War II, they've moved away from redlining, and anything that is in support of redlining and those exclusionary neighborhoods defeats our intent to make this a more equitable, affordable community.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings. All right, and do we have any other testimony on 0921 accessory dwelling units? And just as a reminder, everyone has 3 minutes of testimony when the little buzzer goes off.
Sounds great.
Please take a seat, say your name and address into the microphone.
Gerald D. Hyman, Jr. Address to be is 5186 6th Street, Eastport area. I'm in the process. I've already been approved for the grading permit. Just going through getting approved for the building. I was sort of forced to sign a letter saying that I would not rent out over top of my garage. That was like, I had to do that in order for them to issue me my building permit. But other than that, it would greatly help my family and myself out as well, because, times are hard. Cost of living has greatly been increased, and it's still increasing. And I have my son there, my daughter, a couple grandkids, and my mom, which is bad knees and health is slowly deteriorating, will be there as well. I definitely need to have my accessory dwelling unit in the rear, which is a detached garage in the rear over top. They just say I can't rent it out. As well as even if I was to sell the home to someone else, I cannot rent it out. But it would definitely help offset cost of living as well as taxes, because I've owned a home 5 years, 8 months, and so far my taxes has increased like $3,400. And then they tell me once I do the renovation, it's going to be in the double digits. And it also will help. You're running out of land space and homes throughout the city, and as well as commercial. My brother has a towing business right here in the city of Annapolis, Top Notch Towing. And his lease is about ready to expire, and the owner keep posting signs up for sale, for sale, for sale, and the ridiculous price that he's asking for, nobody is biting on trying to purchase it. But my brother, he's in fear of losing his business as well as the license with the city of Annapolis because of availability of C4 lots. You gotta have a C4 lot. This will help out all the way across the board. It's time now to reevaluate what was once before and go with what we need now as far as the accessory dwelling unit. I can't rent it out now at all. And who wants to rent an accessory dwelling unit with no stove there, with no range, Put everything else, bathroom in there, kitchen, water, heating and air, but no stove. It would help out tremendously. And I call for a change of laws right here today for that. It will help out in so many different ways. Affordable housing and all sorts of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hyman.
All right.
All right, do I have any other live testimony on 0921? Seeing none, I would like to say for the record, we had 3 pieces of written testimony submitted to our committee from Jay Antonelli, Keith Cyphers, and Laura Hanby. Yep, that was John Antonelli, or Jay Antonelli. Excellent. All right, Dr. Nash, if you wouldn't mind coming up to answer any potential questions that we may have in our debating of this bill and deliberation of this bill. All right, so colleagues, I do also want to say for the record, and I sent this to everyone, this bill was back in May. The AARP did submit testimony in support of this legislation. I just sent it back around to everyone so it was fresh at the top. The main thing being helping build more walkable communities and helping individuals age in place. 0921 is a bill that is very personal to me. I have made it no secret in public testimony in my op-ed to the Capital Gazette. I was able to afford to live in this city when I first started out, making less than $30,000 a year, which in Annapolis is borderline impossible because of an off-the-books accessory dwelling unit. If we had been caught, a family that was providing someone who is now one of your colleagues with a safe, comfortable place to live that he could afford would have been fined and punished. That rule is silly. I have more expletive ways of describing it when I'm not on a camera and microphone, but this bill makes a lot of sense and it is about time. And I think a lot of individuals here presented personal and statistical reasons for why we need to do so. Before we get to the amendments, do any of my colleagues have any comments regarding 0921 as it is currently written? And then we will get into the amendments. Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I do, and as I was, and I can't remember if Alderman Finlayson was on there too, but we did introduce AD legislation a year or so ago, year and a half, when Alderman Rodriguez was here. But when he left, we kind of ended up withdrawing it. But I also had a similar stormwater, which I'll get to later with the amendments. So I'm certainly very open to this concept, and I've had some people in my ward reach out who have ADUs or would like to have some. I mean, there are actually two in my neighborhood who could have ADUs. I don't think they do currently above garages, which otherwise it's wasted space. But my specific question for Dr. Nash would be, a couple. But so first of all, former Alderman John Hammond came and testified at one of our recent meetings. So I just wanted to ask you, I know he was on the council for a while, and I know his wife was too. So I'm assuming he has more knowledge than as somebody who's just been involved with the city process for a while. But I wanted to just check to see, because one of the things he mentioned was that this legislation would reduce setbacks, I guess. I forget what he said, to almost zero or remove setbacks. I didn't see anything in the legislation that addressed setbacks, but do you happen to know what he was referring to with that?
I'm not sure what he was referring to, because these structures would have to meet the setbacks of any accessory use, like a garage.
Okay. And what is that setback for a garage for accessory use?
Well, it depends on the zoning district, but it's typically 30 feet from the front yard, and then depending on where in the rear yard it's located, anywhere between 2 or more feet from the side and rear yard, depending on the height of the structure. So every additional height for the structure, you have to move the structure further and closer to the main building. Mm-hmm. The accessory building can also not be larger than the principal structure.
Right. Okay. So, well, that's good. So it's essentially the same as the garage, you said, kind of thing
that's
would be
right.
used. And the other concern that he brought up was that this is essentially a wholesale removal of rezoning, I guess. I forget his exact phrase, but essentially removing, I think what he was saying, removing the single family zoning and just changing it en masse instead of doing it in a bit more of a targeted or trial manner. But I think one of the things that came up with the previous iterations of this legislation which I'm impressed with the length. Last time it was like 80 pages or so, I think. This is much shorter. But one of the things that came up was that the actual possible density is going to be a lot lower because of potentially of the setbacks and what else. My point again is that some lots just aren't going to be able to physically, I imagine, have these on the property, right?
That's right.
And so do you have, I'm trying to remember, I have to look up the staff report, but did you, I can't remember if you had something in there about the projected eligible lots. Do you have an estimate on?
Not for this legislation. It's hard to know because
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to estimate the lot size. There's also environmental considerations like critical area and other setbacks and easements that I wouldn't be able to do an analysis of with the GIS program.
Right. Okay. And so if these would be constructed in the critical area, they would have to comply with
The lot coverage requirements.
Existing for that. Okay. All right. And so Ms. Margolis mentioned creating partitioning a house, basically making it into a duplex. Is that something that would be allowed with this legislation to convert from a single family to just a new complete duplex?
As long as it met all of the standards in section 216410. So as long as it was not larger than 850 square feet and that it had ingress and egress and met the other requirements.
If I could butt in, I did add the very first amendment for this bill, though, would remove the 850 square feet limit on an existing structure. So if there is no extension of the footprint, i.e. if someone were to put it in a garage or in their basement, because that would have no real environmental impact if it's converting a garage or a basement, an existing structure, into housing.
Mm-hmm.
So as written, it is as Dr. Nash said, but Amendment 1 is potential to change the overall size.
Mm-hmm.
I would still think it would need to be smaller than the primary structure, as it is called an accessory dwelling and not a two-family dwelling.
That is also
how
true.
exactly that would be determined is a good question.
So is there currently a different process for if somebody wanted to do that separate from the ADU in terms of just converting to, would they have to split their zoning or subdivide or something in order to do
If
that
they're
as well?
in a R4 district that allows two-family dwellings or something along those lines, they'd have to meet the bulk requirements for a two-family dwelling.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in this case, they would not. But they wouldn't be able to make it equal in size, like a duplex.
Mm-hmm.
The accessory dwelling would need to be smaller.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And all right, but that's all for now, I think, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Savage. Alderman Finlayson, do you have any comments on 0921 as written before we get to the amendments?
I do have a couple of questions for Dr. Nash. Thank you. Dr. Nash, do you know how many ADUs are in existence right now? Legal or illegal?
Well, I don't know of any illegal ones, but there are some legal ones that have existed since before 1970 in continuous use, so they are considered to be legal nonconforming. There's only a handful of those, mostly in the historic district.
Are they all inspected?
If they're used as a rental structure, a rental unit, they are inspected. If they are not rented out to someone, so if maybe someone's son lives there, then we wouldn't inspect that.
Do you have capacity for adding ADUs? Small numbers, big numbers?
Well, we're always stretched on capacity, but I would say that I don't expect to see a huge avalanche of applications right away for this. I expect it to be a more steady a number of applications that we get in, so I think it would be manageable for our inspectors.
Too often, we're accused of adding legislation, adding to our code, and then not being able to adhere to it ourselves, such as through inspections. So that's the genesis of my question. Have you received complaints when they do exist, legally or illegally?
I have received complaints for illegal accessory dwellings. I have also more often received complaints for overcrowding because we know housing costs are high. Sometimes there's large extended families living in one house in order to be able to afford it. But if it's not a rental property, there's not a lot we can do in terms of enforcement because we can't trespass.
Unless they are a rental.
Unless there's a license
certified.
or a permit in play.
Mm-hmm. Do you have, and my question about complaints, I guess was grounded in parking issues. So has there been concerns raised, or do you have concerns about parking?
Parking and trash are probably the biggest impacts we're going to see for this legislation. So that is why there's been different ideas proposed for parking. There's different philosophical approaches to whether an off-street parking spot is required. In some cases, it would help alleviate some of the pressure on street parking, but in other cases, it's driving up the cost of something that's supposed to be affordable. So there's, as always with planning and zoning, there's a balance you have to strike when you're determining your policy.
If it is a licensed rental, is parking usually part of it, or is that an additional expense?
As far as the rent that is charged, it depends on the landlord and the availability of on-street parking.
Okay, thank you. I think any other questions I have, it'll be about the amendment, so I'll hold off.
All right, well then, what I was about to say on parking is relevant to one of the amendments, so we can bring that up later. Amendments 1 through 3 are all put, yes, Alderman Savage?
Could I just ask more general?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess, yeah, and thank you, Alderman, for your questions. It got me thinking about some others. And so are there any areas where you think it doesn't make sense to allow ADUs, based on maybe the nature of the zoning? Because I mean, I noticed that the conservation districts have it as special exceptions. And, in light of our short-term rental, I can understand why. But are there other limitations where areas that may have, I don't know, more parking restrictions or problems, which I'm sure we all know about, where it might make sense to also make them special exceptions? Or are there areas where just from a planning perspective, we just want to make sure you can't do any ADUs?
Those conservation districts are where we have the most pressure because there's the most density now. So we know in Eastport, it's hard to come by an on-street parking spot. We know downtown, it's hard to come by an on-street parking spot. So I think there's reasons to very carefully look at the specific location in those zoning districts and make sure that that specific geography and context is appropriate for a more intense use. That's the point of the special exception. I think the rest of the city, most of our neighborhoods can absorb additional density. It's something we'll have to watch going forward. If everyone applies for an accessory dwelling unit, that would change our calculus. But given the expense of building and maintaining one, I don't really see that happening.
And so there is a reporting requirement built into this, right? So if there was an
Every year.
issue, I guess you would be notified, and as well as the council. But
Right. Every year we give a report to the Planning Commission on the comprehensive plan implementation. And this will be included in that report. And so we'll be able to kind of keep an eye on the number of accessory dwelling units.
okay. And are there any issues with the comp plan in terms of, I guess, is that where the community character would come in? Would these have to still be looked at for compliance with the comp plan, or would there not be any need to?
Well, if they were in a conservation district or areas where we have site design requirements, we would review the accessory dwelling unit the same way we do any accessory structure in those districts, such as R2NC or R3NC or R3NC2. The comprehensive plan will advocate for mixed-middle housing, of which accessory dwelling units is a critical component of creating different housing options for different groups of people. So I don't see a conflict with the comprehensive plan.
Okay. Well, good. And you mentioned the trash impact. Is that just, can you explain that more? Just in terms of the quantity, are you
Just
saying?
quantity, that's right.
So that's just a concern, I guess, just from having that be more trash sitting out on the street. And,
And every trash bag has to be in a trash can. So, and the trash can has to be labeled. So it's just that the primary person living in the primary structure and the person in accessory dwelling structure are going to have to communicate about where the trash goes, when it goes out, how it's properly bagged and taken care of, or there will be issues. We have a lot of issues with buzzards and other nuisances. So,
and so I know this is not your department, but in terms of recycling, do you happen to know if there would still be a requirement that, for example, the owner of the ADU would have to provide their ADU with recycling capacity?
I don't know if that we've thought of that. I think that they could have their own bin if they want, or they could share. I think they could do either way they want.
Okay. I guess that's it. The parking issue, I think, was already brought up. And
we'll get to parking.
We'll get to that as well. Okay, I think that's it for now. Thank you.
One thing I do want to comment on, and I will not mention parking because there is an amendment addressing the parking space where I think this debate would be more appropriate. In regards to trash, as we all know, housing costs in this city are so high that many people need to have either roommates or sometimes multiple families living in a single family lot in order to afford to live and provide for themselves in this city. This isn't going to have any more of an impact on trash than something that is already having to be done by the city. It's something that's already having to be done. In fact, I would say this could potentially have a positive impact because the increased property values can help us fund our municipal services more, because accessory dwelling units do tend to increase the property value of a home. Colleagues, do we have any other questions on 0921 as written? All right, hearing none, we're going to move forward to amendment number 1. The purpose of this amendment was to remove the 850 square foot cap on existing structures only. I was made aware of this potential flaw when working with Action Annapolis. Someone asked the question, well, if my basement is bigger than 850 square feet, does this mean I now need to build a wall to shrink it, which would add to the cost of the unit overall? The bill as written would have done that, thus defeating the purpose of what I am trying to accomplish. And the environmental impacts of converting an existing structure, I think, are minimal. Out of all the amendments, I do think that this is the least controversial of them. And Amendment 1, for the record, is on page 5 in line 23 after unit insert that is not established within the existing footprint of the primary structure. So the 850 square foot maximum would apply only to building new existing detached structures. This would apply only to converting existing things that already have had their footprint made.
Mr. Chair, I'm trying to figure out what my question is. So removing the cap means that they could develop an ADU with the exact same footprint of their entire home.
Per the conversation with Dr. Nash that we just had, as an accessory structure, it would have to be smaller, but if it is in the existing footprint, the cap would not be relevant. And truth be told, it doesn't really matter to me if it is the exact same size if it's put in a basement, because the footprint has been made.
Dr. Nash?
Right, so I think this makes sense because if you have a basement that's 1,000 square feet, it would be hard for us to regulate how they're going to get rid of 150 feet. And then how are we going to monitor that year to year? What exactly would that even mean? So I think it's good that it applies to new buildings, like if you're going to build an accessory dwelling unit like a garage. But I think if it's part of an existing structure, I don't really think it makes a difference.
Okay, I guess my concern is, and it's not really a concern, my question was about removing a cap which opens the door to, any size. And if that's not significant, then, I'm not sure.
Any size would only apply, though, if it's in an existing structure. So if it's the detached thing, something that could change the overall look of the lot as it is currently developed, the 850 square foot cap would remain in place.
Say that again, the 850-foot
Cap would remain in place if it is a new structure being built.
Okay, so this insert is just for existing structures.
That is correct. So if you have a basement that is 900 square feet, the cap would not apply if you were to convert that into housing.
Okay.
Alderman Savage, did you have a question?
Are you done?
Go ahead.
I had a similar question, concern. I'm just trying to understand it better, I guess. But I understand what you're saying in terms of the detached would still be subject to that, but this would say anything that's part of the primary structure would not. And although it would still have to be smaller, but is there really any established difference between or definition of what's smaller? Could it just essentially be like 1 foot smaller and it would be considered an ADU, or is there a percentage?
That's what I was wondering myself. I wonder if it would be helpful to add a definition of what an accessory dwelling unit is in 2172, and then we could define it that it has to be 75% the size of the primary structure. I don't know if you want to put a limit on it in that case, but that is typically the formula we use for accessory versus primary.
I do not, because I think when you add red tape and complications to something that is meant to allow individual homeowners to help address our affordable housing shortage and our overall housing shortage in the city, it adds to the overall costs, because all of a sudden you need a lawyer in order to start navigating certain things. You need engineers or builders or something else. It's an extra thing that ends up getting in the way of these being built. And I am going to say plainly, if an accessory structure such as a basement conversion is the same size as the quote primary residence, it really doesn't matter to me in the grand scheme of things. We are turning an existing structure into more housing with negative with no environmental impact on it. The same amount of residents will be in the place as if it was smaller. The same amount of trash will be produced as if it was smaller. All of the hypothetical amendment proposed would do is add to the costs, add to the legal red tape. And I think that would be prohibitive for allowing people to provide affordable housing. Yes, Alderman Seft.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think I can understand why it might be helpful though to have a definition. I mean, but before I get to that though, I mean, I think in terms of the affordable housing, you know, I don't think there are any guarantees this is going to definitely help, and I say that because even you know, I watched the first Action Annapolis panel that they had on this, and somebody he wrote a book. I can't remember if he was with Strong Towns or not, but even in his presentation, he stated that only 15% of ADUs are below the market rate, and the average cost he had in terms of how much, and I think he's referring to detached, but how much it would cost to build an ADU was like, it was over $100,000. I think it was like $120,000, $130,000 to build one, which is an incredible investment. And he was saying to get a payback period within a reasonable amount of time, it would like, what would he say, $1,400 or so in rent, from what I recall, which is not exactly affordable housing. And I think Alderman Arnett has kind of brought this point up before in terms of, I know when I think with the previous iteration of affordable housing, we were talking about actually forcing what we can do to force market rate on some of these ADUs. If we really want that to be the goal, and I know this is kind of a bit of a tangent from the current amendment, but maybe there's more we should do in terms of just making sure these are definitely going to be affordable housing. But again, I kind of digress. The original point with that Dr. Nash talking about the definition, because I'm trying to envision this in terms of how it affects like an existing structure, and this may not be incredibly likely, but just to help me visualize, if somebody were to buy some large home in, I don't know, Murray Hill or something, because I know there's some large square footage homes out there, you know, I guess first of all, how many ADUs would this authorize a property owner to have? Just one, or just one? Oh, okay. So, okay. Because from my own head, I was just kind of figure out the difference between an ADU compared to just buying a house and renting out a bunch of homes as long-term rental. But the difference is, I guess, in this case, they have to have their own egress and
that's right,
utilities and a bunch of other requirements to be technically considered an ADU.
To be a habitable space, they have to meet all the building code requirements.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
So one thing, a couple things that I would like to address on the affordability overall. One is, if someone is provided free housing, which I think is the ultimate below market rate, such as providing housing to family members, be it an elderly parent, being it a young adult who does not have enough income to make it on their own in a separate unit, but wants a sense of privacy while still living at home. Those are people who are no longer competing for existing housing in the market, meaning there is now less demand. And as basic economics goes, when you have low supply, high demand, prices go up. The same principle will apply to increasing the amount of units with these accessory dwelling units, not units per lot, but I mean, if we allow new units to be constructed, such as ADUs. MIT recently released a study on May 6th showing that the increasing of units has a overall downward pressure on housing costs in regards to rentals. So this is a very small step due to some of those hurdles and steps forward and investments being made, but it is still something that comes down. We also need to keep in mind, what are we defining as affordable? A single family home, which is the alternative for most people, is going to be exorbitantly more expensive than renting one of these smaller units. And I do think we need to call to attention that our colleague who expressed that concern, isn't really presenting it in good faith. He was never going to vote for this.
Don't go there.
So I do think his concerns need to be taken with a grain of salt.
Well, I don't think we can make that assumption. I think we need to treat each other's arguments with.
But in regards to things that would keep a cap on this, like below market value set, that prevents these from being built because it prevents people from making their money back on this return on investment.
And I can see your point in that ADUs could help to lower the market rate potentially, but they're not going to. I don't think they're going to do anything to lower the cost of actually constructing an ADU, and that's where it's hard to get beyond that point where ADUs are just going to they cost a lot to build, and so somebody's going to want to get their return on investment, which means they're not necessarily going to just be beholden by the market rate, and that in itself is going to possibly dissuade them from building them. I mean, I think the ADUs that are more appealing to me are the ones that are, the traditional, the stereotypical granny suites, tiny homes that get constructed, which are a lot cheaper, I believe. I know a friend who's looking at them, and I think Elon Musk even bought one for like $20,000 or $40,000. I forget. And I forget the square footage on those, but those I think are more appealing. But those really weren't what the panel was talking too much about. But I guess back to Sally's, Dr. Nash's possible amendment. I'm just thinking. I'm just trying to again get this sorted out in my head. The downside, if we don't define it, would be we could potentially just have ADUs that are essentially the same size as the primary structure. Is there a downside to that?
So that would only be the case in an existing footprint, because otherwise they're limited to 850.
Right.
So if you had, a very small house, you probably could get 850 and 900. I mean, I don't see a huge concern about that issue.
Okay.
Alderman Finlayson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't like describing policy as red tape. Sometimes we have to put things in place looking forward so that staff can do what we've asked as far as the code is concerned. I think our questions now are forward-thinking as to what could be. In my ward, I have an extremely diverse housing stock. I have public housing on one end, and I have the McMansions on the other end. Several years ago, and Dr. Nash probably know where I'm going with this one of our residents subdivided his basement into what could be considered ADUs, except he subdivided it into 10. And because it was a private residence, we could not go in and inspect, and it was an illegal rental. And the owner happened to be a restaurant owner, and that's how he housed his staff. And it took many, many months of investigative work to try to get in to inspect because the living conditions were not appropriate. And finally we did, and actually started finding the gentleman, and he moved. And so my concern has to do with the large footprint, a 3-car garage that could be developed above as an ADU. And how could that be subdivided And I'm talking 1,000 feet or more. And, you know, we have a growing problem with multiple families, and it's not a problem, it is what it is. So how do we make sure that we're not providing undesirable options for living? We just need to make sure that the standards are set so that Mr. Hyman and Ms. George can provide those smaller units, but those people that are thinking about other options aren't going to be, I want to say abusive, and that's probably not the right word, but they may take what we've planned and stretch it, let's just say. So I don't know whether there's a question in there, but do you understand my concern, Dr. Nash?
I definitely understand your concern. There's always that one guy who, you know, who's determined to break the law. But I mean, for the most part, when we catch people with violations, a lot of the time it's they didn't know, and they're happy to come in and do it right. Sometimes they're just sort of hoping that maybe they won't get caught, but they're also, you know, more or less happy to come in and fix the problem. It's that smaller percentage of people who don't care and are just going to do what they want to do. And they're the group that makes it very hard to do enforcement, because no matter what we do, they're looking for loopholes, you know, and we can't do 24-hour surveillance on people, you know, so that is always going to be the tricky problem with, you know, making sure people are good neighbors. There's just no way to legislate good neighbors. I wish there was, because my job would be a lot easier.
Well, the example I cited included police investigation. I mean, it took the police 8 months to, you know, track down the culprits. But anyway, as I said earlier, I don't want to put more on our department than we are capable of handling.
I mean, I hope that that is a small percentage of people. And, you know, I don't have direct knowledge of any illegal accessory dwelling units, but I hear anecdotally of these accessory dwelling units. And I would hope that those people want to be into compliance and will be willing to come in and apply for permits, make sure things are up to code, and if they're rented, they meet all of our safety requirements. So ultimately, we'll be bringing in revenue from those permits, and we'll be able to have more enforcement action on the people who are willing to comply with us. So, you know, hopefully we would have more tools to go up against the bad actors that are kind of ruining it for everyone else.
And we do know that a few bad apples can spoil for everybody else.
That's right. And I would say the last ordinance that I wrote with my staff, we were trying to run down all those leads, and we were trying to close all the loopholes. And what we ended up with something was very convoluted and, you know, didn't pass. And part of that was because we were trying to very carefully think of all eventualities. So, you know, that just goes to show you sometimes simpler is better, but you have to be at peace with the fact that there might be some unintended consequences.
Dr. Nash, do you know how much those that are legally licensed, how much they are charging as far as rent is concerned?
I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Chair, do you have any idea?
What I will say for my off-the-book one was I paid $500 a month for a garage that was converted.
And about how many square feet did you have?
I was living in a space that was about 700 square feet.
Okay.
For concerns on stopping bad actors. The bill as written, and none of the amendments would touch this, only would allow one accessory dwelling unit per month or per lot, which would prevent the multiple subdivisions. But the multiple subdivisions incident occurred when we explicitly forbid these. It's something that will happen. There is a market for it. And so bad actors exist, but I think if we bring forward these things, we allow the opportunity for situations such as my own to come forward into the light for ensuring that they are up to safe habitation standards, and for also collecting additional revenue for the city.
Was the owner of your home a friend, family? Was there a connection?
It was the grandmother of my old roommate in college.
Okay, so family. Kind of like
Family
that.
of a
I'd
friend.
Call that family.
Family of a friend, yes.
You were adopted. It's okay.
I was taught to cook some borscht, which was very good.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Alderman Savage, do you have another question on amendment number 1?
Yes, just another, on I guess, community character. Because again, I'm just thinking through my head what this could look like if we don't define ADUs. Just again, picturing my neighborhood as an example, I guess, because it is all single family houses. Like I said, a couple that could probably have ADUs, garages. But anyway, if somebody were to come in here, I don't know, a flipper or something, buy a house, a couple houses, and just put on essentially duplexes, but one of them would have to be slightly smaller than the others and then sell those duplexes to a new owner who would then sell the smaller, or not sell, but I guess rent out the smaller one, which, might be okay. But I guess one of my concerns would be community character. So would planning and zoning still have the ability to kind of have influence over the appearance of those buildings to make sure they do, in that regard, mesh with the rest of the community?
If they're in one of the districts that requires site design for building permits. So that would be R2 and C, R3 and C, R3 and C2. So not most of your residential, which is in R2 in the city.
Okay, because I'm just thinking, and maybe this is not something I need to worry about, but I've certainly seen structures throughout the county that have looked very just random, especially down in South Canyon. They build these really narrow homes occasionally just to get around various laws, and I'd hate to see something get put in that looks very odd. But I don't know. I'm just wondering if it's worth trying to have. That'd be a lot to ask site design review, I think, on all of those. But I don't know. I mean, did you think that's a risk, or is that just? I mean, I guess you're saying there might be a lot of risks that we can adapt to if we need to change this in the future.
Right. I think that's something we need to do with all our legislation is make sure, check your back in a year. Is it working? Check back in 2 years. Is it working?
Yeah. Is there any other way that you think of that might address that community character?
Well, there are a lot of ways to address it, but I hate to address something that isn't a problem, at least not that we know of yet.
Yeah.
I based on what I know about accessory dwelling units, I would be surprised, but if that happened, but you never know what, our particular market is going to lend itself to.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know, but I think it's something we should wait and see how it's going in a year from now.
And if I could add something that could potentially alleviate those concerns, the conversions are going to be done on structures already existing. So basements, attics, garages. The community character of that doesn't really impact much because the facade will change minimally, if at all. The new structures being constructed are traditionally built in the rear of the lot, kind of behind the main house. And individual homeowners building these things are not going to build something that would dramatically clash with their own property. They're going to want to try and keep these things looking nice to keep their own property looking nice. I know I are putting a lot of faith in the behavior of future builders that are local homeowners, but I think that is a pretty safe step to take forward. Alderman Finlayson, I saw you had an additional question on amendment number 1.
No.
All right. Do we have any further questions or concerns or comments on amendment number 1? All right. Up next, amendment number 2, a simple common sense alteration to this law that I think will cause no controversy whatsoever. Amendment number 2, on page 5, strike lines 25 through 26 and sequentially re-letter the subparagraphs accordingly. This amendment was recommended by the Planning Commission and removes the 1 off-street parking space requirement for every accessory dwelling unit. I am going to, if you don't mind, use chairman's privilege to take the first comment on this. When I originally wrote the legislation, I had included an off-street parking space without knowing all of the detail of how much the off-street parking requirement would prevent these from being built or providing the goal of a type of housing. The extra cost of off-street parking can actually add, according to the Brookings Institute, a study they released in 2020, 5 to 15% of the hard costs of construction and maintenance for individual units. It doesn't matter if it's a single-family home, an accessory dwelling unit, an apartment space, 5 to 15%, which in this area can actually go from $200 to $400 per cost of the unit. I very firmly agree with this amendment. I had actually planned on putting it forward before the Planning Commission had recommended it, and I went into the Planning Commission hearing being very explicit about my desire to remove this. I think this one helps, keeping the parking requirement increases the environmental impact on the lot by adding impervious surfaces of asphalt. 2, it will add to the costs of 5 to 15%, which in this area can be $200 to $400. And 3, there is the fundamental moral argument that Dr. Nash heard me make in the Planning Commission meeting. Parking is storage for your car when you're not using it, and I am going to very explicitly say I do not think car storage should be counted as important as housing. When we accommodate and build for cars, we end up increasing our issues with parking or traffic because it encourages car dependency. I think this is something that the market can help design, where if someone knows they're going into a structure without easy parking access, that could adjust their decision-making process and what they find more important. And it is something that I think we as a city need to try to move away from if we are going to try and become a more accommodating city for everyone, a more walkable, bikeable, transit-focused city. With that said, I'm assuming no one is going to have an issue with this amendment and it will cause no questions or comments.
I don't think I would go quite that far. Mr. Chair, you may want to separate these because I don't want to have to vote against all the amendments because there's one that I can't live with, which is the parking one.
I will
to be
keep these
specific.
separated out per our recommendations.
While we want to move towards a walkable, non-reliant on vehicle city, we're not there yet. And I think it only fair to all of the neighbors that we consider parking. I mean, we probably hear complaints about parking almost more than anything else. And for us to set up a situation where parking is exacerbated, I think is not the direction we should go in. So I would have, and I understand why the Planning Commission decided to strike that section or recommend that it was stricken from the legislation. But it also says that it should be reviewed in the conservation districts. So I would just have a problem with that amendment. personally.
If I may respond to that, I think there is a misconception that I frankly used to have in regards to how do we get to a lack of reliance on car dependency? Do we put the infrastructure in first, or do we let the infrastructure follow? The book Strong Towns, which is a very handy guide for city planning purposes, says that the most stable way, highly recommend, that the most stable way to actually get to a lack of auto dependency is to simply make it more inconvenient to drive a car to the point where walking or transit is the easier option. I think it was the American Planning Association had also put forward a study that in order to maintain a adequate mass transit network, you need to have about 5 to 6 housing units per acre. And this is a way that can get us towards having a more self-sufficient mass transit network with our busing system. And when you start, again, trying to accommodate cars, The High Cost of Free Parking, another fantastic book on city planning, actually brings forward the very fantastic data that it causes induced demand for people to have more cars, exacerbating our parking issues. I get parking complaints in my ward, and while I understand the frustration, when I interview my constituents, a lot of it comes down to they own 3 or 4 vehicles for their family. And they do that because it was previously built in a way that they believed could accommodate it. If we take a step forward now, we can potentially eliminate a lot of the issues. And I'm also going to go ahead and put forward a big issue with our parking requirement, not our parking requirements, but a big issue with causing our parking is the high cost of housing, forcing multiple families living in units meant for single families, whether it's for single people living as roommates or potentially, which we all know happens, 2 or more families living together that are unrelated, each having an increase in cars. So if we can start taking these steps now that would stop encouraging ownership and use of cars, we can actually start taking a bite out of our parking and traffic problems. Alderman Finlayson, I do not know if you would like to respond to anything before I jump to Alderman Savage.
Nope, go right ahead.
Excellent. Alderman Savage?
Yeah, I'm torn on this, to be honest, because I mean, I think we had put this in the last version of the legislation, but I mean, I see your point with, it'd be adding potentially more impervious surface, and I certainly don't want to do that. And I think in many parts of the city, I think Dr. Nash may have said this, it's may not be an issue. I don't think it'd be an issue in my neighborhood unless we had a huge increase in the density of ADUs. But I think there are certain, for example, Eastport, I think could have quite a problem, and they already have a parking problem. And so compounding it with ADUs, I don't know if there are even a lot of eligible properties over there. That's how much of Eastport's in a conservation district?
Well, it depends on how you define Eastport, but
it's the parts north of what was that, 5th or 6th, the bridge.
It's east of State Street and over to the end of the peninsula.
I'm just looking up the maps you have in the staff report. So which zone, looking at the map you have in the staff report, what's the pale yellow? That's R2NC?
That's from Madison over, sorry. So from Madison over, the orange is R2NC.
Okay. All right, and that's the only zoning that would be impacted by this legislation?
And R3NC, R3NC2.
I mean, on this map, though, that
Oh,
in
yes.
Eastport, it would just be that.
And
the
That's right.
R4 down there, and then
And C1 and C1A you can see up top downtown. But as far as Eastport goes, it's R2 and C.
so that's a conservation district. The NC,
It's a neighborhood conservation district, yes.
and is that a special exception? Find the
Yes,
chart.
for accessory dwelling units, yes, that would be special exception.
Is the parking something they can address in the special exception process? Like if we call it out in the legislation where, I don't know, if they have to go for a special exception that they'd have to look at parking considerations?
I
Is that
think
something we could do?
in your, it wouldn't be part of the special exception, but in the standards in section 216410 where he has struck out parking, I would say you could leave it in and say for conservation or for R3 and C, for the R1, R3 and C, R2 and C, R3 and C, R3 and C2, C1 and C1A, one parking space is required.
Could we say something like, just looking at that letter E, could we just say something like, for properties in the conservation district, one of the criteria to be reviewed in the special exception process will be, or should be, whatever, will be parking requirements to I don't know, assess adequacy or assess the need to provide off. I'm just thinking.
So
out
you're
loud
saying
here.
it wouldn't be an absolute requirement in those districts, but it would be determined through the special exception review?
Yeah.
I think that would work.
Okay. Well, I'd kind of like to get thoughts from my colleagues. I don't know if I don't think we need to draft that on the spot, but I
It'd
guess
be nice if there was some criteria for when one did need to be provided,
yeah,
if it's
yeah,
not absolute.
yeah. I guess we could. I would like to get your thoughts, but maybe that's something I'll just approach our colleague from Ward 8 about to see if that's something he would want to, because I don't want to speak for his ward. It just seems like that might be, or for, I don't have any conservation district, it's just 1 in 8, I guess, right? So I guess I'll talk to her too. But
So may I ask, because I didn't get all of what you were saying, are you just looking at conservation districts?
Yeah.
Okay, and making it a parking stipulation?
That is one idea. That is something the Planning Commission proposed, that either eliminating it or eliminating the parking requirement for everywhere except these conservation districts. Because we know parking is tighter in those districts. There's just more demand for parking.
So, it's a couple of points I do want to comment on parking is, as I stated earlier, the off-street parking requirement does create the positive feedback loop, encouraging more auto use, induced demand. And the other issue in regards to parking problems, something that I've always found is that there is not a problem parking per se. It is a problem parking directly in front of where you want to be. And we quite simply put, do not have enough land in the city to accommodate that. With Eastport in that area, I have always been able to find a parking space within 4 blocks of where I want it to be, and I am willing to make that walk. And most homeowners, when they are building this, will factor in, do they want to include an off-street parking space into their design and construction of this? But by mandating it, we essentially eliminate those that do not have the lot size that could accommodate a structure and an additional off-street parking space. And it does put an emphasis on, you cannot build a home because you cannot provide a car storage. We are valuing that storage for the car more than the housing. And the AARP did support this amendment as well. Alderman Finlayson?
I am concerned about parking. And I understand and I agree that, sorry. I am still concerned about parking. I agree that everyone wants to park in front of where they're going, and that's not realistic. At the same time, I'm not sure how responsible we are, or we would be, to simply ignore the parking issue. Even if we are moving towards a walkable city, and we are also an aging city as far as our residents are concerned. And so that needs to be considered. So I would be open to looking at some other options as to where, maybe parking isn't needed in all areas of the city, but maybe it is in some areas. And maybe the conservation districts is the option that we need. But we need another option, because I'm not comfortable with not requiring any parking at all.
With the We Are an Aging City, amendment number 2 was supported by the AARP as a best practice step forward as part of their encouragement of more walkable cities. And I believe that the parking requirement does directly interfere with building a more walkable city due to the positive feedback loops that I have stated earlier.
May I respond to that as a member of AARP?
Certainly.
And someone who has just had not 1, but 2 knee replacements in the last 2 years. They're not focusing on Annapolis. They're focusing on the country. And I commend them. But I'm thinking about what we have to do for the residents specifically of Annapolis. So, their statistics are great, but we have to use our application when we're making our decisions here, so.
And I will say one more time for parking. We have a lot of these parking issues, which I've stated my overall feeling on, but part of the exacerbation of that is the high cost of housing, forcing multiple people, multiple families living into units designed or meant only for one family. And these are people who cannot effectively share their cars because it's people unrelated, working different jobs, not on the same schedule. And that is a bigger problem on our parking than anything else. If there, I think we're all kind of getting now to the point where we're looping. Do any of my colleagues have anything else to add before I close conversation on amendment number 2?
Well, let me respond to what you just said.
Okay.
Is the expectation that there may not be multiple families living in these ADUs?
In some cases, it will be the same family in both properties. In other cases, it will be different families in each property. In the case of that is really no different than multiple families needing to live in a single family home in order to afford it, which is something we all know has to happen here because individuals cannot afford our high cost of housing.
And so with the expectation that that's going to happen, then how are we addressing parking?
With the accessory dwelling unit, it is likely to be a smaller amount of people living in the separate structure and therefore requiring less cars. They are smaller by nature, so it doesn't tend to be these larger family units living in them or multiple family units having to move into a single family home.
So even if it's 2 or 3 roommates, for example, as you just said, all who have different cars, then there's still an impact, is what I'm hearing.
Correct, but this could potentially either have that same amount of impact, but overall reducing the cost of housing. Do you have any? All right. Alderman Savage, I will get to you, and then I will close conversation on amendment number 2.
Yeah, I just want to say I think I'd like to. I'm not quite ready to move on this amendment. I'm not saying that I don't want to hold up the legislation, but I'm just saying I'd like to talk with colleagues from Ward 1 and 8 because they have the conservation districts, and I think the most parking restrictions. I mean, I don't know about the other wards, but I think those have the most. And so if they have a parking concern, I'd like to present this to them as a potential compromise where we at least have the board of the special appeals look at this during the special exception process to see if they do want to require, we'll have to come up with some standards, I guess, but do want to require some off-street parking because, if that's a concern of theirs and that might get their support, I think it's potentially worth compromising because I do think there are situations where, I don't agree with the premise that we don't make things so bad for people that they are forced to get out of their cars because I think some people just don't have an alternative. And I think that also would potentially lead to a lot of other impacts, such as public safety, response times, if we just go ahead and assume it's okay to add traffic. So anyway, I just personally want time to approach them. And if they don't have a concern about it, then we don't need to worry about the amendment. But I think it might be a good way to build some more consensus.
All right. Amendment number 2. Told you, no controversy whatsoever.
Do you want to vote? Do you want us to vote on any of these amendments as we go down?
I figure we go through each of them because I kind of see everything connecting, not exactly connecting together, but go through the amendments after that, and then one at a time go through our recommendation, favorable or unfavorable per amendment when we get through each of them. If my colleagues have a strong preference for a different way of doing this, I am more than happy to adjust.
It's fine with me.
All right. Amendment number 3 is another amendment recommended by the Planning Commission on page 5, strike line 31 down through 33. This amendment was recommended by the Planning Commission and allows the use of short-term rental for the accessory dwelling unit or the principal structure. This was a recommendation from the Planning Commission to allow owner-occupied short-term rentals. When I originally wrote this bill, I was hesitant to open the door to short-term rentals, but as I've read some more literature and seen how banks and loan officers are willing to finance these things, accessory dwelling units, the flexibility of them is a key feature. And this was one of the big things that was allowing that flexibility. And I will say the AARP has also supported this amendment, AARP Maryland. And I've come to agree with that because if you take away the flexibility of this, it is another additional barrier for someone being able to construct these. And I am of the increasing belief that if the short-term rentals are having an impact on your overall housing market, as I said in our meeting proper last night, it is because you have an artificial shortage of housing. These will allow people to afford to live in our city with a slight, by increasing this flexibility of individual homeowners who have factored this into their rental and overall income. I've had meetings with several people who were grandfathered in with this, that being able to short-term rent their accessory dwelling unit was part of their income and overall factors for being able to afford to live in this town. And if this amendment doesn't go through, I will have accidentally hurt them. And that is not something I want to do. So the increase in flexibility and allowing homeowners who create these a revenue stream so that they can be able to live in this town while our housing costs dramatically increase. And that does have an impact on existing residents as well in the form of artificially inflated property values and tax bills being accordingly. I do think this is a good amendment. Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm fine with this as long as it gets coupled with Alderman Tierney's Amendment 4, which would put the owner-occupied requirement, owner-occupied for, I guess, the principal structure, right? Because again, I think that makes for better communities when we have at least part of the main structure owner occupied. That does make it more appealable to people who, to rent that out to relatives or friends, and and also some of that accountability to make sure they have an interest to make sure it's not going to get out of control. But I think if we don't have that requirement, then it could potentially get out of control if somebody just decides to, again, make like we're having a discussion the other night. It could be the situation where somebody just rents the entire property out as a party property, and that doesn't do anything, again, to serve the intention of trying to increase affordable housing in the city. So I think it's in the spirit, but only if they're combined. I don't know if you feel the same, but
I will agree with you that Alderwoman Tierney's owner-occupied requirement is the jelly to this peanut butter. And again, for me, it's leaning into that extra flexibility for homeowners trying to provide this. Something that I've heard in meetings with stakeholders is that they have started at short-term renting to someone and then found that they've really communicated well with that short-term tenant and extended their rentals. And something to put in perspective, and Dr. Nash, please correct me if I'm wrong, a month-to-month lease is a short-term rental in the city, correct?
So a short-term rental is less than 90 days.
So a month-to-month, as written in that lease contract. I'm learning more and more that my original housing situation in this city was flying in the face of a lot of city regulations. But again, I took that month-to-month short-term rental, and I was able to afford to live here for a year before moving into a townhome with a couple of roommates in the city, and that helped me get established. And there are a lot of people like me, and there are a lot of homeowners who would want to build this that would want to either keep that as an owner-occupied short-term unit where they are providing for themselves and their families and allowing them that flexibility, or potentially be willing to extend that offer to a longer term. And this, along with Alderwoman Tierney's, is all about flexibility to me.
I would just add for Alderwoman Tierney's amendment, I'm not sure that would prevent someone from renting out both the primary and the accessory dwelling unit. It just says that they have to be owned by the same people. So I would think it might want to say something specifically about how either the primary structure or the accessory dwelling needs to be occupied by the owner of the property.
I need to take a look at Alderwoman Tierney's amendment. An accessory dwelling unit primary structure on any one lot shall be in common ownership. Huh. Guess so.
well, I think we could just add something at the end that says, "To be an accessory dwelling unit and primary structure on any one lot shall be in common ownership, and the primary dwelling
Occupied by
and the primary dwelling shall be occupied by the owner."
something like that.
I would push back slightly on primary dwelling. Because if the owner of the property is in the smaller accessory structure, as some incidents I've read out in Portland where elder family members want the downsized unit and rent out the primary unit. If they're living in one of the structures, it is irrelevant. Could we add that amendment to Alderwoman Tierney's amendment? Amendment number 4 shall be in common ownership. And
we can make
You'll
our
have to
own.
make your own amendment. You can't change her amendment.
could I add?
We would have to make our own amendment.
Okay.
Based on what she has written. We could change
So
it
I think,
like-
Mr. Chair, to be adding at the end, one of the lots shall be occupied by the primary owner. Would
One
that
of the
work?
structures.
Well, may I-
And one of the structures, you're saying? Yeah, right, that's better. One of the structures.
Yes, Alderwoman Finlayson.
May I ask Dr. Nash a question? Under what circumstances would the accessory dwelling owner and the primary owner be two different people?
It would be very unusual. It would, I was thinking, like, could you condominiumize? I guess you could condominiumize.
Condominiumize?
Yeah, where you basically
I know what it means, I'm just...
turn them both into condominiums. and then the lot is owned in common, but 2 different people own the structures, I guess that would theoretically be possible. We do actually have one property like that in Eastport. So I guess it would theoretically be possible. Very unusual.
In my conversations with Alderwoman Tierney, I think her intention was to have an owner occupancy requirement in the actual units. So if we could add that amendment, Alderman Savage, do you care if it's your name added or my name added?
I can email you.
I need the wording.
I can email everybody the wording to see if it's
Yes,
something
please.
you want to.
So what would the amendment, the new 4? Well, no, that would be
Now, this would be
5 or
amendment
6
number
now.
5.
Amendment 6.
6, 'cause-
Amendment 5 was submitted by Alderman Savage to us earlier regarding impervious surfaces. The new amendment so Amendment 6 would have an owner occupancy requirement in one of the dwelling units.
So it would read, owner occupancy would be required in either the primary or the accessory dwelling unit.
Correct.
More or less, yeah. What? Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
What I put is, which, whatever, I'm not beholden to the wording, but it says, and one of the structures shall be occupied by the primary owner.
So that, again,
And one of the structures shall be occupied by the primary owner. Or would that be property owner?
Well, also, what if they were in the same structure?
That's why I wanted to use the phrase unit.
Yeah. It might be better to go with Alderwoman Finlayson's.
Okay, what was that
wording,
one?
you would think I could repeat it?
We were all up very late last night.
The owner of the property shall be required to reside in either the primary unit or accessory unit.
I think that would work. Yeah.
Is that,
All right, I think I got it. I'll send it out.
all right, Amendment 6.
Leave it to the English teacher. All right.
That's Amendment 6. Mr. Chair, I will move a recommendation of approval for Amendment 6.
I heartily give it a stamp of approval.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Cool.
Ms.
So
Green,
Amendment 6 passes, and we still need to get to Amendment 4 and Amendment 5.
We haven't finished 3, have we?
I have not closed conversation on Amendment 3. Do any of my colleagues have further questions or comments?
I did, but I have to go back to Dr. Nash. The short-term rental license is what is being recommended to be used in this amendment, correct?
That's right.
Does that create any sort of obstacles for the planning department? I mean, is that the smoothest way to do that?
Yes.
Is the application
I think
seeking
so.
the same information?
That's right. I think that would be fine.
Okay.
All right. Any further questions or comments on Amendment number 3?
No, Mr. Chair, I'll move a favorable recommendation for amendment number 3.
Do I have a second?
Okay, let me catch up. So
We
this
have
is,
not
this is
given
your
an up or-
short term.
Yeah, we haven't given an up or down.
You
on,
haven't moved
1
one
or 2.
or 2.
Yeah,
I know
just to
that
let you know.
because he kept going on, so I'm just trying to get us,
I was just making sure you knew.
Yeah,
I'll second that
you
one.
know.
All right.
Okay.
All in favor of Amendment number 3?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, cool. So Amendment number 3 and 6 have favorable recommendations. We have not done any motions on 1 or 2. Since 1 or 2 seem to be the ones that generated the most conversation and debate, I would like to get through 4 and 5 and then go back to 1 and 2, if that is okay with my colleagues. All right. Amendment number 4, an accessory dwelling unit and primary structure on any one lot shall be in common ownership, from our colleague Alderwoman Tierney. I think she intended to have this be a owner occupancy requirement. I believe as written from my interpretation, if any of my colleagues have a different one, this means you cannot sell the accessory dwelling unit as a separate housing unit. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mr. Chair, isn't this the one we just rewrote? So
We rewrote the intention of, and I think current law already would forbid this because that would not be a single family zone. That would be a duplex, which feelings and personal conflicts on are irrelevant for this specific thing. But I don't know.
Mr. Chair, I would make a recommendation that we vote down amendment number 4 in light of the new amendment 6 that we just approved.
It does seem redundant and adding in legislative language that would not accomplish the goal.
Am I misunderstanding?
No, I think we incorporated 4 into 6 and then added the language. But to your point, that I see what you're saying in terms of the ownership issue. I wasn't thinking about it beyond the short-term rental, but I mean, if what you're intending to do, it sounds like you're not intending to just simply allow duplexes to be created, because that'd be completely different ownership.
Not with this bill.
Yeah. But I think, okay. Well, that's fine, but not for this one. Okay. Yeah, so I think you're right then. I'll second it. I'll second that if we...
Second the unfavorable recommendation.
Unfavorable recommendation, yeah.
Okay.
And Dr. Nash had previously mentioned definitions, and maybe this could be included in the definitions. Would that make sense to do that? That an accessory dwelling unit and primary structure have to be owned by, but that would leave out, what was the term you used?
Condominium.
Condominiumizing it.
Yes.
That would eliminate the ability to I can't even say it, condominiumize it. You know, we start to get punchy after 8 o'clock, I'm just saying.
Especially after Monday.
Right. The day after a late city council meeting.
I hope this will not get into a midnight deadline, so I think we'll be okay.
So we voted, did we vote?
No,
yeah, we
yet.
voted unfavorable on Amendment 4.
Amendment number 5. I don't think we've actually voted, did we?
You didn't vote.
We did not?
Vote.
Okay. Okay, all those in favor of a... do we vote an unfavorable recommendation, or do we...
The motion on the floor is to recommend unfavorably.
Okay, so motion has been first and seconded. All those for a unfavorable recommendation on Amendment 4?
Aye.
Aye. All right.
Okay.
Amendment number 5 is Alderman Savage's amendment. On page 5, after line 20, insert a new subparagraph D. The addition of an impervious surface shall not be allowed on any lot containing an accessory dwelling unit unless the department's stormwater management engineer has determined that the proposed surface will be treated or managed utilizing a stormwater management device or technique and has been approved by the department, and sequentially re-letter subsequent paragraphs. Alderman Savage, is your amendment? Would you like to start us off on this?
Yeah, thanks. And I did, in light of some of the testimony and just, I was just also just thinking more about it, comparing to what the previous language in the previous ADU. But basically, let me back up. So and so I did send new language, by the way, over email, and I'll explain it. It just adds another sentence to this. But my intention is that I know it's not a lot of impervious surface that these would add, but when we're talking about the bay, you know, it's really a death by 1,000 cuts. And I think if we can put something in here that's reasonable, I'd like to do that, because you know, we have commitments to improve our waterways. We have actually our comprehensive plan the last adopted one, which I think has a goal in there about reducing impervious surface. And so I think this helps this to make sure that these do jive with the comprehensive plan. And I'm certainly not looking to put a significant cost on people. So this would just say essentially that they would, they could put in, based on the structure, they could either put in a green roof, which would be a little more costly, depending on the structure. That might make sense. But if it's like a granny suite, that'd be pretty easy. They probably have slanted roofs, so you could put something on there. But in any case, it also allows for that to be treated using some other stormwater management device, be it rain gardens, rain barrels potentially, and neither of those have a huge cost, especially considering the amount of impervious surface you're talking about. But I did add additional language on there, which I emailed, which would essentially say it creates an or. So there's an A, which is says that. So start off with a D. The addition, I guess it shouldn't be an A, but anyway, the addition of impervious surface shall not be allowed on any lot containing an accessory dwelling unit unless, and then I'd have two more criteria. So the first one would be the department's stormwater management engineer has determined that the proposed surface will be treated or managed utilizing a stormwater management device or technique that has been approved by the department. So that's the same as the existing. But the second one, number 2, would add, or equivalent impervious surface will be removed elsewhere on the property. And that's kind of the similar kind of thinking that approach that's used for critical area, for lot coverage, if I'm not mistaken, where, like for example, my house, I'm in the critical area, we're limited in terms of lot coverage, and we put on a screened-in porch on our house, but we had to plant some vegetation, and we had to look to reduce impervious surface elsewhere. So I think that's something people could take out driveway, put in permeable pavers or just grass. They could look at other options. So that I think gives at least another option for people. I don't know. This was kind of drafted on the fly, so if there are concerns from colleagues or Nash, let me know.
Concern of mine, and I think I interrupted you slightly. I apologize, Alderman Savage. Do you have another? Was there more to that?
Oh, no, that was
interrupted
it.
you slightly. Okay, thank you. A concern of mine is, I think, as this is written, Dr. Nash, would this standard apply to any accessory dwelling structures, such as if I were to build a garage, or would this only apply to the dwelling units?
So this would only be applied to accessory dwellings.
Okay. I would ask my colleague if we go forward on this, because I understand the goal. I think this one creates a potential loophole where people can go, I'm building a garage, and then it's an ADU now, and get around it. And I think it puts more burdens on housing than it would those other accessory structures. I don't know if we have time to address over all accessory structure units with the time we have left on this council. But I think that is something to keep in mind.
May I respond
Yes, please.
to that? Yeah, and I think ultimately I would like to look at having this apply to garages, the same idea, because, again, I think something I'll be pushing for next term if I get reelected would be putting something stronger in place to actually, we have a no-net loss of forest, but I'd like to have something where essentially caps impervious surface as much as we can, where lots, they're going to have to be, I think, be certain. We'll have to think this out more thoroughly. I'll talk with staff about it, but what I'm thinking is, so anytime somebody wants to build an accessory unit or any kind of new structure, or in my case, the screened-in porch, they would have to have that managed somehow. We're adding some rain barrels to our house. We had one the other one failed, but we're putting in a new one and adjusted some of our landscapings. But I think that's something that'd be good to require for any kind of structure, because I really do think if we need to get a handle on the impervious surface if we want to get our stormwater under control. So I do want to have this expanded, but this is a good place to start. This is what's before us now, not the other legislation. And that's why I was looking to include this in here, because I don't want to be shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of, undermining our other goals for water quality improvement. So I don't know, Dr. Nash, if you had a chance to review, if this language needs to be tweaked, I can certainly change it before it hits the main council. But this is what I kind of came up with after looking at our amendment from last time and giving it more thought.
I think it makes sense. I guess, 2/3 of the city is in critical areas, so they would probably have to do this anyway, or something similar. I wonder if there's a way to say for properties not in the critical area. I'm not sure it needs to be the stormwater engineer who is overseeing this. If it's kind of akin to what we do for critical area, then that's determined through our plan. Our planners do that. I guess it depends on if you want it to be
My thinking with that, adding the stormwater part, the engineer, was that when I read the lot coverage definition again, it didn't seem like that alone allowed somebody to put in a rain garden to kind of make up for, just as an example, for added impervious surface. It had to do with, it focused on just having essentially limiting the...
Only in IDA, but not in LDA. That's true. That's true.
I'll have to reread it, but it seemed like it was just focused on, actually I can look it up now. It looks like it was just focused on the lot coverage being the impervious surface, but it didn't seem to just have an allowance for treating as opposed to just removing impervious surface.
Right, this would give more options really if you were not in IDA. So if you were not in the critical area or you went LDA, this would give you some options for other kind of treatment. That's true.
Well, if you can give it more thought and over the course of the next month, I guess, since we have the month off, if you think it needs to get tweaked, and I'll have to send it to the stormwater engineer too to take a look at, but happy to tweak. But anyway, that's general thinking behind.
Right, because this wouldn't necessarily trigger a grading permit. So we'd have to make sure that the stormwater engineer got looped in that case.
Yeah, considering the average cost of at least the structure from the panel, the $100,000, I don't think cost of stormwater would be a significant percentage of that, unless it's really large, I guess. But anyway, that's kind of my thinking.
Alderman Finlayson?
Maybe I'm overthinking this or not thinking it through enough. But why wouldn't we just say any new construction would require a pervious surface, period? Wouldn't that get us to the same place?
Well, you could potentially, but...
And I know it's going to be cost prohibitive because pervious surfaces cost far more than impervious surfaces.
Yeah, and the only thing would be rooftop. Like you could do green roofs, which would be, I don't know if would they be technically considered impervious? Technically I think they should be. I don't know what
they are
critical area
for
would say,
critical area, but not for stormwater management.
But some roofs may not lend themselves to that, so you may not be able to put a green roof, and that's the only surface I think where you couldn't make it impervious then in that situation, right? So,
but would it have to be a hardscape surface? Couldn't it be a green surface? I mean, if they're putting in a driveway, would it have to be, whatever, cement or brick or tar or whatever it is? Couldn't it be a green surface?
Well, for critical area, almost everything is considered lot coverage. So any man-made, even gravel is considered lot coverage. So you might be able to meet Alderman Savage's amendment requirements, but you might not be able to meet other existing city requirements.
I remember some years ago on LGAG, Local Government Advisory, and we tour around for the community. LGAG is the local government advisory made up of all the states that are headwater states of the Chesapeake Bay. And every 3 months we go to a different location between Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Delaware, and DC, and look at best practices. And I remember being, I think, in Harrisburg, where one day we toured alleys that had various types of pervious surfaces. And actually, I remember going to a basketball court, and the mayor of Harrisburg, who was on our committee, took a glass of water and poured it on the basketball court. And then it all disappeared immediately, So I know there are other types of, not structures, but material out there that could be used. Like I said, it's probably not your least expensive type of option, but if
They
that's
also
what
require
we're
a lot of
trying to get
maintenance.
at,
Yeah. If you can meet the maintenance requirements for that, then
it has to be clean.
You have to clean it. But that is an option to meet your stormwater requirements. But it might still be a barrier to critical area because those don't really help you with critical area. So
Yeah, and
it depends on where you are.
And it's still so lot coverage. Looking at the definition, let's see, paved surfaces constructed of permeable materials, allowing direct stormwater absorption, shall be exempt from the coverage calculation. If approved by the zoning director. That's not the critical area. That's just the general definition, I guess, for lot coverage. So it sounds like it could work for paving. It's just the rooftop that would still be, you're much more limited in terms of pervious surface on a roof because your only option is pretty much a green roof because that's considered part of the lot coverage calculation, right, is the rooftop. So that's why, that's the only challenge with that language that you were suggesting, I think.
Does rain barrels address the impervious surface of the roof, though, to a sufficient degree?
Well, that's why I put in there the stormwater engineer who would be able to definitely calculate that. I mean, it captures the first flush of rain, but no structure is going to be designed to manage large storm events. But, we do currently allow rain barrels to be installed so people can get credits to their stormwater fee. So I think it is, I don't know, for critical area, do you know if you allow rain barrels to be
10%
part of
rule,
the?
you get some credit for them.
You get some
for the
credit.
10% rule in IDA.
Okay.
Only.
Okay.
Colleagues, do we have any other thoughts, comments, questions on amendment number 5?
I do have a question. Alderman Savage, did you say you have an A and a B? Did you subdivide that out?
I did. I emailed you the latest.
I thought you said you had sent it to us, but I don't have
You
it,
don't
so
see
I
it,
don't
okay.
have. Oh, okay. Okay. Your letter B, equivalent impervious surface, will be removed elsewhere in the property, meaning transferred from one location to another? Is that what? Trying to figure out what that means.
So this would be where, yeah, so maybe I should say, better state that, but the equivalent coverage of impervious surface will be removed elsewhere. So that'd just be so if somebody wants to put in a ADU that has, I don't know, whatever, 500 square feet of rooftop, then they would have to either do A, which would be put in a rain garden or something like that, or B, they could just take out, I don't know, their driveway and put in permeable pavers for the driveway, or take out a patio or something like that. So they're taking it out somewhere else so they can put it as a part of the ADU.
And who would oversee that? Is that Dr. Nash's department, or is that Public Works? Where's the stormwater guy?
The stormwater is in Public Works.
Yeah.
So we would administer the permit. Public Works would be one of the agencies that would review and sign off, and the stormwater engineer would have to sign off on that particular part. But then it would come back to us to approve the permit, and we would make sure it was all built according to the plan before we issued a use and occupancy.
So this sounds like a big step to add, because we're talking that two departments now that have to weigh in before the final permit is approved, correct?
Right, and that's why I was wondering, I mean, for the most part, these aren't going to be triggering grading permits. I guess in some cases they will be. So Public Works, it might be an additional burden for Public Works. But this is very similar to something planning and zoning does for critical area. So I think, we could manage that part of the workflow.
You know, Dr. Nash, you need to stop. You know what I'm going to say, right? You keep saying we can manage, and I know that we're adding to an already full plate. Not that it's not necessary, but you also need to ask for the help that you need. Okay.
That's a good point.
All right.
Can I just, to that, I mean, would you, Dr. Nash, would you recommend that we just, because I could just take out stormwater engineer and have it be the department has determined that the proposed surface, I mean, like you do with now with critical area, I just wasn't sure if you had, I know you have landscape architects and folks who have, know how to design these things, but if you tell me that you think it's fine for you, that you could handle, because I mean, I think I don't know, do you do some of these calculations for critical area in terms of making sure that a rain garden would treat enough? So you do already, so.
We have a chart. I think it might be ideal to write it in a way that it applies to properties that are not in the critical area, to make sure that they would be subject to the same rules as properties in the IDA. Oh, wait, as far as adding new impervious surface. That might work. I mean, we might need to wordsmith that a little bit, but the point would be that if a property isn't in the critical area, they would still basically have to do the same mitigation that's required by properties that are in the critical area.
Okay. Well, since it's not quite ready, then I don't know if we should necessarily take it up now.
I am comfortable with tanking it up. I understand the intent behind it. Despite my concern with treating accessory structures differently, this does give us support for some of our green initiatives that our city is trying to go forward. So I will be supporting this amendment.
Well, I'll send out.
Do you want us to go to amendment 1 and 2 for final up or down vote while you kind of wordsmith it a little bit?
Can we finish this one though? Because I really would like to.
Oh, I apologize.
Propose. Could we, I like the idea of where you're headed. Could we simply use letter B to say that the goal would be to encourage pervious surface or the equivalent of impervious surface that would be removed from elsewhere, something like that.
Or maybe no new impervious surface and unless offset. No, I'm sorry. I'm too tired to think of an amendment.
I know, this is,
Our next one's going to be a little easier, the next legislation, so.
I think there's potential there.
I mean, it's up to the sponsor. If you think that this is getting too convoluted, maybe you want to rework it and bring it back to the floor.
Well, I think I have something that could work based on the feedback. I think it's good to have the A in there, the first item. I need to change that to 1. It'd be good to have that 1 in there because it allows for somebody to, if they just don't want to remove impervious surface elsewhere, they can at least treat what they've put in. Although I think ideally, you're right, Alderwoman. Ideally, it's probably best to just remove impervious surface elsewhere, but I just know that might be a little I don't want to be overly limiting to the legislation itself, so that's why I'm trying to have some options for people.
Well, let's go back to A for a minute, because A is superfluous as far as I'm concerned, because it says what the stormwater management expert does. You know, it is his job to determine what areas need to be treated or managed using whatever device has been approved by the department. Isn't that what he does? And I'm saying he because I think it's a he, but I mean, do we need all of that verbiage to tell us what his job is? We expect him to go to a site and determine whether stormwater needs to be treated.
If there's not a grading permit, he wouldn't necessarily be sent a plan for review.
Well, so the tweak I had in that, and I'll send this, is to just remove that. So the engineer, because Dr. Nash said they're already doing this with the critical area anyway, to a large degree. But just simply to say that so for the A, which I changed to 1, would be the department has determined that the proposed surface will be treated or managed utilizing a stormwater management device or technique. And then just keep it at that. And then have, or equivalent coverage of impervious surface will be removed elsewhere on the property.
Could we just stop at will be treated or managed? Do we have to say how? I'm just trying to shorten it to simplify it, but maybe it's not working.
Yes.
Utilizing, because aren't they going to utilize the stormwater management device or technique? I mean, isn't that what they do?
Yeah, I think that's fine, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I don't know whether it's going to matter if we shorten it, but.
I think that makes a lot more sense to me.
Okay, yes, that's, you're on a roll here with language tweaks tonight.
Sausage making, man.
All right, I will send this out again. The most recent. This is why I think it's good we have committees, because we often do this in rules and government on things. Don't work this out. Okay, I just sent it out. I think this is greatly improved. Thank you.
When did he send that to us?
8:32.
Oh, okay. I was looking for earlier in the day.
Gosh, it's already 9.
Yeah.
New amendment 4, language. That was Alderwoman Tierney's amendment. I haven't gotten the most recent one outside of the one sent 29 minutes ago. It just came. Okay. All right. The new amendment number 5. On page 5, after line 20, insert a new subparagraph. D, the addition of an impervious surface shall not be allowed on any lot containing an accessory dwelling unit unless, 1, the department has determined that the proposed surface will be treated or managed, or 2, equivalent coverage of impervious surface will be removed elsewhere on the properties, and subsequently reletter subsequent paragraphs. Sequentially reletter subsequent paragraphs. I apologize, it's late and my stutter is coming out slightly. Cool. Are we comfortable doing a favorable recommendation on amendment number 5?
I'm good. Dr. Nash, are you good?
All right, I have a motion. I believe the I'm good counts as a motion. Do I have a second?
No,
Second.
I need a motion.
Okay, can we get a formal motion, please?
I'll move.
I'll second it.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, let's go back to 1 and 2, which I think were the causes of some of our more controversial stances or debates. Amendment 1 for no longer doing the cap on existing structures. Do we have any further comments or questions? I will keep these very limited, considering we did get into these pretty substantially earlier.
Just quick. I mean, I think I'm good with this one. Yeah, I think the discussion was very thorough, as you said, and yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I mean, I think we may want to look at putting a definition in, but I think I'm okay with this.
Alderman Finlayson, do you have?
I think I'm good with it, and I also, as I said earlier, would appreciate having definitions at the beginning.
Do I have a motion for a favorable recommendation on Amendment 1?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, be quick on that one, Mr. Chair. Dr. Nash, would you be able to look at to see if we needed to add a definition, or if there was one that would address some of our concerns for ADUs? Thank you.
Amendment number 2, the non-controversial one.
Parking.
Colleagues, do you have any last minute? I will keep this debate or talk on this a little much shorter than what we previously got into, but do we have any last minute questions or comments on amendment number 2? Alderman Savage?
Yeah, and this one, I mean, personally, I'm not ready to take a position on this one, because I would really like to, I'd like to speak to our colleagues from the conservation districts and see if they have a concern about parking, if we can get that kind of compromise amendment where if we go to the special board of appeals for special exception consideration, in terms of having them looking at the parking. If they're okay with it, then I'm completely fine with this, because for my ward, I don't think parking is going to be an issue. But I'd just like to see if we can get some compromise. I mean, that's not going to prevent me from taking action on this legislation, but those are my thoughts at the moment.
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, that's it. I'm just rambling at this point. Go ahead.
I'm not gonna be in support of Amendment 2. I've said why.
We have one person in favor, myself, one person not taking a stance, and one person against, meaning the amendment would fail if my understanding of the procedure is correct. And I'm guessing without all the amendments given a consideration, are we allowed to move the legislation forward, or are we allowed to?
No, you can, because they're not your amendments, so the final vote for these amendments come during city council meeting.
Okay. So
fine.
we will,
Chair, could I move a favorable recommendation on 0921 with the amendments that we've recommended favorably?
with amendments 1, 3, 5, and 6.
Right.
Amendment number 4 was recommended unfavorably. Amendment number 2, no motion was done, so it is not technically recommended favorably or unfavorably. Cool. All right, so we have a favorable recommendation with those following amendments. Motion has been made. Do I have a second?
Who made the motion?
I
Alderman
did.
Savage.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Yes, I'll second it. But, Mr. Chair, we should be clear that amendment number 2 failed. It wasn't, we didn't take a
It
vote?
did not fail. No motion was made for it.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought there was a motion.
No.
Okay, my fault, sorry.
I just played it out loud.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so all those in favor of 0921 with the favorable recommended amendments of 1, 3, 5, and 6. It's
Aye.
been motioned and seconded, so aye.
Aye.
All right. Cool.
Mr. Chair, I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that I'm not sure how I'm going to vote at the end of the day. I want to hear additional discussion. I think there's merit and I think there's some obstacles. So I want to see how my other committee responds also.
Cool. All right, up next, 01321. Dr. Nash, thank you for sticking with us for this. A couple of us had some concerns and or questions that the sponsor was not able to answer. I do want to note that we came up with an amendment out loud proposed by Alderwoman Finlayson to remove the term slums from the recommendation because of its racial connotation. We don't have that written out yet, but am I remembering that correctly, Alderwoman?
I think so.
Okay. So my big question that I personally had on this is our new comp plan involves redeveloping a lot of strip malls, correct, into mixed use development? Rezoning a lot of strip malls into mixed use development. Would this ordinance make that more difficult to, once those are rezoned, to redevelop those properties?
Turn your mic on.
Sorry. We would just need to make sure that we still have the ability to use eminent domain, which I believe the ordinance does protect that ability. There's really the limitations with this ordinance are making sure that we're not eliminating any specific language that we need to meet some grant requirements. And so I would say for the slums to make sure to run that by the law office, that there aren't any grant requirements that say a jurisdiction has to designate an area as a slum before we will give you money. I don't think that there are, but some of HUD's grant language is still pretty old. So, I wouldn't want us to not be eligible for a grant that, because we took something out of the code. But Teresa Wellman, our community development administrator, has gone through the ordinance and feels comfortable that all of those aspects of our existing ordinance that allow the city to do certain projects through grant funding would be protected by shifting some of the duties to the new Affordable Housing Committee and other language that's proposed in the ordinance. So she feels comfortable with the ordinance and that we'll still be able to apply for funding opportunities with that language removed.
She was, and my colleagues remember differently, she did seem open to that amendment of removing slums. Does it potentially hurt grant opportunities? I think that is worth considering. Alderwoman Finlayson,
I'm sorry.
that is okay. An issue Dr. Nash brought forward on the potential amending of the bill by removing the word slum, it could there is a low possibility of us losing out on potential grants if HUD still has that definition as a requirement for receiving it. You did say that was a low possibility, correct?
I'm not sure if I just haven't spoken with Teresa about that specific example. So I would just want to double check with the law office and Teresa to make sure that that wouldn't preclude us from being eligible for any grant opportunities by removing that language.
Did I make that official amendment?
You had not, we do not have it recorded, but I know it was something we
Okay.
discussed.
You discussed it, and I do believe that the law office checked into it after you discussed it, but I'm not sure of the outcome.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm not seeing anything that would, any notes from the law department or anybody else, so. But this is time sensitive, Dr. Nash?
I don't think it is time sensitive.
No more than the sine die coming up, but
We don't have, what do you mean, Saturday?
when, isn't there like, if we don't get October? That's really the only time stamp I
October.
see on it.
Oh, yeah, no, I thought, I heard her say that this was time sensitive. It's not gonna be heard before the full council until September.
Yeah.
So what's everybody else's flavor on this?
If it doesn't interfere with our grants, I think your amendment is very good at addressing a lot of the racially coded language that we have left over in our code. I hope my potential loss of funding hesitation doesn't come across as crass, but
Well, by the time this comes to the floor, we'll have an opportunity to hear from the law department and from Ms. Wellman to see if there's really any implications for funding, or impact on our funding. I wouldn't want to do anything to jeopardize it, but this appears to be more about verbiage of how we address properties. Urban renewal was term of the past, and so we're trying to bring us into more current language, which means all the more that the term slums should not be used.
Right. I agree, but sometimes HUD has surprisingly out-of-date language. So that's why. I mean, there's still properties in the city that are on paper owned by Urban Renewal Authority. So there's still a lot of vestiges of it.
So, Mr. Chair, then I would recommend that we postpone action on this legislation. It's not time sensitive. I have issues with amending the language. So I say we postpone it until, I'm seeing Ms. Green's hand up.
The only problem with that is that you guys meet the last Tuesday of the month. Well, the fourth Tuesday of the month.
And is this on the agenda for the first meeting in September?
Well, then if you postponed it, you wouldn't hear it until October
You mean at the full council?
at the full council,
Well, what would be wrong?
unless you guys have a special meeting.
Then it would be on for second reader, the first meeting in October.
Yes, and I think you have 1 or 2 meetings in October.
Could I offer I'm sorry if you mentioned this, but what if we just pass your amendment and make our recommendation? But like I thought I heard you say earlier, we'll have a chance to hear from the law office and Dr. Nash again before our final vote anyway. So if we make a recommendation, then we'll know come the final vote in September.
I'm fine with that. If you want to give a favorable recommendation from this committee, and then I'll amend it from the floor. That's fine.
Well, we could.
I'm okay with
You can do
recommending
your
your
amendment.
like your proposed amendment.
Yeah, do you want to do that tonight?
Learn more information from the law office, we can adjust here and there, but.
Or you can
Okay, but I don't have the wording for an amendment.
Okay.
So that's my hesitancy.
Do we?
So you don't, for right now, you can just make the amendment and I can submit it to Jacqueline and she can put it in amendment form.
Okay, well, I can see, I think, is this what Jackie wrote for me? Anyway,
No,
the
that was
amendment would be on page 3, line 27, and I would eliminate slum areas and. So it would read, including the development or redevelopment and comprehensive renovation or rehabilitation of real property, including blighted areas in the exercise of powers authorized by the annotated code of Maryland. Does that make sense?
What did you strike?
Pardon me?
What did you strike?
I eliminated slum areas and. That's in line 27.
On page.
Page 3. And I will make a note to that if that appears anywhere else, it should be stricken from the language. I don't think it is, but maybe.
Alderwoman, it is mentioned on page 2. Anyway, it's mentioned in a few areas. Oh, actually, a lot of it's been stricken out anyway. So yeah, it's only
What line on page 2?
a few places. So it'd be striking on page on page 2, line 29, striking slum areas, and like you said, and then also line 37 through 41, the definition.
Okay.
Did you get that already?
Under definitions,
Yeah.
we would strike the term slum areas and renumber. So that's eliminating all of number 1, lines 37 to 41, and renumbering from there. And Alderman, where else did you see it?
Page 3, did you get that one?
Page 3, you said?
Line 27, removing slum areas and.
Was that the original one?
Yeah, I think the new one that he pointed out was page 2,
2.
line 29, of real property, including slum areas and blighted areas.
Okay, that was the other one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
So, Ms. Green, page 2, line 29, which eliminated slum areas and.
Cool. Do I have a favorable recommendation on this amendment?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Do I have a motion to give O1321 a favorable recommendation?
As amended.
As amended.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, cool. That is last of our legislation before the committee. Do we have Mr. Rice still with us?
I don't know if Mr. Rice was going to be able to come, but I did see that Mr. Evans was not.
He's
able
here.
to.
And Eric.
Oh, really? Where are they?
They stuck with
Eric's
us.
on.
Wow.
There he is.
Steve.
Good evening, Mr. Rice.
Mr. Rice, welcome, sir.
You are my hero because you have been online waiting for us for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I am so impressed. Thank you.
Steve, did you hear the praise you and Hope got last night from Mr. Clark?
I did, and it's very much appreciated.
Can we get his volume up a little bit, please?
I'll turn it up on my end as well.
Okay.
I don't know. Is this better? Is it better?
A tiny bit. I'll listen harder.
All right, I've maxed it out on my end.
Okay.
Dress, I apologize for
I get to walk away because I'm not chairing. You, on the other hand, are chairing.
Well, I just got an email from Ms. Wellman saying that
Thank you, Mr. Hyman.
His brother towed my car once.
I did just get an email from Ms. Wellman saying that we do need a definition of slum and blight in the code to use slum and blight national objective. So,
Okay.
sorry.
That's one opinion.
All right, Mr. Rice, please update us on the state of our business. Whatever, just do your thing. Sorry, it's late and I'm tired.
Sure, and I know it's late, so I'll be quick. I promise. We're doing very well here in Annapolis when it comes to the economy. Our citywide vacancy rate is 5.3%. We have had 11 new expanding or relocating businesses in recent days. During the month of June, we actually had 4 ribbon cuttings. During that same month, we assisted I mean economic development, 46 businesses during the month. Our calendar is consistently busy. I will also add that anecdotally, when we talk to business owners, the mood is positive and they generally report that things are going pretty well. I also think that there is still some, I wouldn't call it latent, but I'll say pin-up demand for goods, services, and experiences, which puts Annapolis in a good position from that standpoint. I think that anyone who spends time in the city, particularly on the weekend, can experience the fact that things are on an upward trend. And I'm also very, I would say, excited by the fact that the recovery zones will be extended for another 3 months, which will give businesses that had a rough 2020 additional time to recoup some of the losses from last year. So all in all, I think things are pretty positive. I think we're in a good position. I think we're fortunate, and we're actually outperforming other communities across the state. So, yeah, that's it. Things are good.
That is wonderful to hear. Colleagues, do we have any questions for Mr. Rice?
Mr. Rice, do we have any businesses on Main Street that we've lost as a result of COVID?
Well, we have businesses that we have lost. We've had other businesses that have moved in. It's hard to say definitively whether or not COVID was the catalyst. Some of the businesses, by my estimation, that we lost during the COVID time period, I think were struggling pre-COVID, and COVID exacerbated some of their financial difficulties. So we don't have any sort of mechanism that requires businesses to do any sort of reporting when they decide to leave the city or they shut down their operation. So I don't have any data to say definitively, but I'm sure that's the case. But I'm not sure if it was really COVID or if COVID just accelerated something that was already happening.
Mm-hmm. What I'm getting to is if we're finding out, if we do anything like an exit interview, and I think you kind of answered that, to find out what we could be doing differently to keep them. And I know some of it's out of our hands, probably most of it is out of our hands. But I just wondered whether they were seeking some kind of support that we're not able to give them.
Well, when we get word that a business is planning to close its doors, we're pretty proactive in trying to reach out to that business and essentially do an exit interview to see if there's anything that the city can do or could have done to help the business. And from what I recall, I don't think that there was anything that the city could have done to help these businesses that we were able to catch before they decided to move on.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Savage, do you have any questions for Mr. Rice? Mr. Rice, thank you for your briefing and all you do. Do you have anything else to tell us before you go?
No, I'm excited. I think again, we're on an upward trend. I hope it continues, and fingers are crossed, and we're going to continue to work hard.
Thank you, Mr. Rice.
May I? I'm sorry.
Yes.
I always think of something after the fact. Last night we approved the extension of the recovery zones. Is there an initiative to help non-restaurant businesses? Because I think we're all hearing from businesses that are not restaurants who are saying, what are you doing to help us? So is there a discussion around helping those businesses? And I have no clue what that might be, but.
Well, any business that reaches out to us that's located within the city of Annapolis, or that wishes to come to the city of Annapolis, or wishes to get started in the city of Annapolis, we're going to do our best to help. So, the short answer is yes, and all the businesses have to do is ask, and we'll do what we can do.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Rice? All right, Mr. Rice, thank you again for all that you do and your updates. We look forward to seeing you in September.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Evans sent us an email saying he was not able to be here, so I was wrong in my initial excitement. Do I have any other things for the general discussion from my colleagues? Hearing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Close the meeting.
Thank you.